Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for your patience as we dealt with a few of the AV final touches. I'm Alexis Bucknam, the Director of Student Programs for the Blum Center for Developing Economies, and I want to welcome you to our third annual Tata-Berkeley Symposium. The Blum Center has been engaged in this project for the full 3 years with the support of the Center for South Asia Studies here at Berkeley. And this year we're delighted to add fellows from the Center for South Asia Studies Tata Travel Fellowship. And it's a really exciting combination of students that we'll be hearing from today. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jagannathan to make some remarks from Tata, and then we will hear from all 6 of the fellows that are here today. I want to also acknowledge that we have a fellow from last year who joined us, Elizabeth Snyder, and we're delighted she was able to be here. And then we'll have those presentations and then end with a question and answer period. And for those of you that are available, you're welcome to stay and enjoy lunch with us. So with that, I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Because the camera is focused here, I suppose. Good morning. It's such a pleasure for me to be here this morning. And ABC yesterday was saying that the weather is going to be very cloudy, rainy, and so on, but I see a bright sunshine. So that is a good sign for this symposium. And I had a brief about the center and the South Asian studies from both Shale and from Sanchita before I walked into this Blum Center. And I'm very impressed with the way in which the University of Berkeley has gone about collaborating with a house of Tatas in a substantially big way. And I'm seeing very young people here. And one of the tricks my CEO used to say was, if you want to stay young, be with the young people. So, please ignore my gray hair at this point. I feel very young to be with Ryan, with Robert, and with Nida, and with Kate and others. I'm really impressed. Tata ISIS has been an ongoing project for the sustainability effort of the various Tata Group companies in the last 3 years, and we have had almost 33 graduate and postgraduate students come into this. I think it has been an exhilarating experience, both for the students as well as for the Tata Group companies. I, for one, from TCS, for example, we have had 2 students who had come in, and they had their projects in very diverse areas, nothing to do with software, but in projects related to accessibility for potable water and so on in villages, which is what we in Tatas believe that we have to pay back to the society which has supported us all along. I, for one, this is my 37th year with the Tata Group. I've traveled within the group from Tata Motors to Tata Steel to Tata Quality and to now currently with Tata Consultancy Services. And I've lived the ethos of the Tatas for 25 years in Jamshedpur, the place which really brings out the best of the Tata Group's initiatives towards the corporate social responsibility and sustainability efforts and so on. So I'm equally interested to learn from all of you what you have learned and what you need to want to tell us and what we need to do more in this area. I think with these few remarks, I would encourage my student community here to come and share your experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here today. So I'm going to, I just wanted to mention that 5 of the 6 fellows who are presenting here today are part of our very successful Global Poverty and Practice minor here at Berkeley. That's part of the Blum Center. And we're really excited that so many of our students have been able to successfully use their engagement with Tata to participate in our minor. So that's very exciting. So I'm going to invite our first speaker up, and Marie, and we will go ahead and start the presentations. Each presentation will be 10 minutes, and at the close we'll have a question and answer period. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Marie Collins. This summer, I was assigned to work in Midtapur, Gujarat with Tata Chemicals on a livelihood creation diagnostic study. So essentially, my main goal was to speak with community members in the villages surrounding Midtapur and see what their current livelihood situation was, like how I spoke specifically to self-help groups, so only women, so what the women were doing to contribute to the family income, and then also what their husbands and neighbors were doing just to assess like how the whole community ran, and then hopefully come up with suggestions to increase incomes for those communities, whether through extra training opportunities so that they can learn new skills, access to microfinance to increase existing businesses or start new ones. So this is a photo from one of my first days there, meeting with a self-help group. And so this was what I did most days when I went out in the villages and would talk to them. It was, I think the thing that struck me most about this was just the ability to communicate directly with people who are not often represented. Like, it's nothing you read in the literature at Berkeley because these women are not usually writing like academic pieces. So I'd actually spent a summer before this living in a village in Uganda. And but I did not have the ability to communicate with anyone around me. So even though I was maybe only 20 meters away from the nearest family, I couldn't actually speak to anyone. So there was, that kind of social, like you could wave hi as you walked past, but nothing deeper than that. So this was a great opportunity to hear what people really thought, and so that was really powerful to me. One thing I wanted to do when I started this program, obviously, was contribute to the programs that they were running for people in the community. I thought, with my training in Berkeley, I would know of a lot of new kind of cutting-edge poverty alleviating techniques. When I got there, I found that, they were doing quite well already. They had a lot of impressive programs running, and it ended up being more of just a learning experience for me. I'm not sure if I brought a lot of new things to the table, but I learned a lot about possible interventions and new things that I hadn't already heard here. And the organization I was working with was actually over 20 years old, so it was a great way to see what could be done in the community, like the progress that can happen in that time. Again, referring to my past experience, like I was in a community that had an NGO presence there for maybe 2 or 3 years, and so they were still just starting out, and it was really interesting to see how much progress can be made in that time. The women in the screen are like from the Rubari caste, and they're like one of the SC castes in Gujarat, and so we did a lot of work with groups of women like these in like sewing programs or other training opportunities, and in the agricultural sector, like drip irrigation, just a lot of like new interventions that seemed to be very successful. And certain villages had like tap lines run to every like house in the village, which was really impressive to me. It's normally probably a government responsibility in a lot of countries, but it was interesting that the NGO had really filled this role for the people in the community. This I put in as kind of a comment on Tata's corporate social responsibility, because they have a really interesting commitment to it. It's written kind of into the companies themselves. You'll see their values posted in most offices and like the things that are run by them. And they have a core, it seems like, very intense commitment to helping the areas they work in, not just in where I worked, which was the NGO like section, but in the company itself. But this also shows a little bit of the contrast. Like this was in the salt pans at the factory I worked at. So this is what a lot of people do on a daily basis, is just load these little metal pans with salt with like kind of picks or something for like 8 hours a day. And they make about, I think, like 120 rupees for that, which is a little over $2. And so that's higher than minimum wage, so that's good. But it was also interesting to see that we were going out to do all this work to try and help bring people out of poverty. But even the people I worked with would kind of like be like, oh, they only make 100 rupees a day or something like that. So there was kind of, you're looking at it from both sides of the spectrum. It was like, well, theoretically they could pay their workers more and consider that like an intervention. But I think that would maybe not have such a wide impact as going into the community separately, because the people who can work for the factory are only people who live right next to it, whereas like our projects went farther out, like in the surrounding area. And also, it would only help people who are like, physically capable of doing this harder labor, whereas the other interventions might have like a broader, more equalizing effect. This was just a commentary on kind of what I've learned in India in general. There's like a lot of very stark contrasts, which were really interesting. Like I feel like I've never been somewhere where there's so many things juxtaposed next to each other that have such like a variety, like the socioeconomic, religious, ethnic, cultural diversity, and it's just right in your face all the time. Like the U.S. has high income inequality, and you see that in the streets of Berkeley in particular. Just walking to the class every day with like passing homeless people. But this photo was funny to me because it was taken from a temple. It's almost like I was standing in the same place for both photos. One was looking to the right, out of this kind of beautiful, like clean, like greenish water, and then to the left, and it's just filled with trash. And it's like the exact same place, but there's like a pathway down the middle. And somehow that dividing line means that one side can be covered in trash and one side has like people bathing and doing like rituals. And so I didn't even ask to see why one side you were allowed to throw trash in, but it was really interesting that there was just this defined line. And from my foreign perspective, there was no logic to like why one could be filthy and one could be clean. And there's a lot of things that I felt like that when I arrived. It was like there's clear systems of like what is appropriate and what is not, but it's sometimes very hard to read like why they happen to be that way. So it's a very interesting experience. And to be honest, I spent almost 3 months in India, and I left still feeling like there was this huge amount of like knowledge that I still couldn't grasp about how the system worked. But that was also exciting. Like you can never learn everything. It's a good reason to go back and keep trying. And this was more just a fun cultural experience. The community, Midtapur, where I lived, had a fashion show during their club week. And my translator actually borrowed her mother's sari and dressed me up for the fashion show. and yeah, in general, I learned a lot from being there. I studied some Hindi, even though they don't actually speak it in Gujarat, but it was useful for traveling. And just lots of the little skills, learning to eat with one hand and all that. So it was a great experience overall and lots of learning.
I'd now like to invite up our next speaker, Kate Lyons, who incidentally won the Tata ISIS essay contest this summer. And if you'd like a copy, we have or not a copy of the essay, but information about it. We have some Center for South Asia Studies newsletters outside that talk a little bit more about Kate and that particular award. Oh, it does have the essay. Oh, great. Thank you. So I hope you'll take advantage of that opportunity to get a copy. So we'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you, Alexis. Good morning, everyone. So I'd like to start off this morning talking about railroads. So railroads are the #1 consumer of diesel in the entire country. So can anyone guess what the second largest consumer of diesel is? Okay. It's telecommunications companies. So telecom companies have over 300,000 towers providing service to around 400 million subscribers, and this equates to around 1.7 million tons of carbon dioxide that is emitted into the atmosphere every year. So you may ask, why so much carbon for a cell phone company? Well, the reason is due to the unreliable lack or the unreliable access to electricity, they're forced to use diesel gensets or diesel generators to keep these towers running in both urban and rural areas. So sometimes you'll have towers running on diesel generators 24/7. And that's, you can imagine with 300,000 towers, that's a lot of diesel. So this has become a financial and environmental concern for Tata Teleservices Limited, which was the company I was working with. And they've looked into a lot of green initiatives to try to offset this large carbon footprint. And that was what my internship was about. I was sent there to look at their green initiatives, evaluate them, and maybe come up with some suggestions for them in the future. So moving on. So these are some of the things that they have already started to implement, such as tower sharing, where more than one company will use the same tower, saving on infrastructure costs, renewable energy, more energy efficient infrastructure, etc. So I had an opportunity to visit these sites, and it was really interesting to see all of this very high-tech stuff going on with all of this green technology. That there is a biomass generator in Rajasthan, and what they've been able to do, this particular site was using a genset for, I think it was 23 hours out of every 24 hours. So now they've managed to totally stop using diesel, and now it's just running on the biomass generator. And the next one is a compressed natural gas source of energy for the tower, and this is in Delhi. So these solutions are really interesting, and they've enabled TTSL to cut down their carbon footprint by quite a bit. But this leads into sort of what Marie was talking about, how going into the project, you kind of think about what you're going to bring to the table, what sort of solutions that you can propose. And I'm a linguistics and a South and Southeast Asian studies major. I don't have that much experience in green technology or infrastructure. So my main experience is, like Marie, learning a lot about these new technologies and the new sort of techniques that companies look into when they're trying to reduce their carbon footprint. And something that I found to be the most interesting and also the most applicable for a place like UC Berkeley was this thing called the Print Manager. Now, this is one of their green initiatives that's in the offices. This is more of a kind of a smaller thing that they're doing. What happens is whenever you want to print something, you click and this pops up. It tells you how much carbon you're using, how much of a tree, etc. And this has enabled them to cut down their printing quite a bit. I feel that this would be really useful in here at Berkeley because, as you know, through our libraries and various places on campus, we use a lot of paper. And if we had something like this, it might kind of help cut down that a bit. And this has enabled TTSL to cut down their prints by around 73%. So it's quite a successful initiative. So as you can see, I've been using lots and lots of statistics, and TTSL has a lot of statistics. But this is a good thing because it means that they're measuring things. And this is something that I found to be incredibly useful and very admirable about what the company was doing. They have a very meticulous set of matrices to kind of evaluate different locations and see what initiatives they're engaged in, and sort of to see getting the most points for the sustainability of the initiative and also how it rates on, you know, the overall impact. And I found this to be a good way for them to keep track of what the locations were up to also measure how well they were doing in these communities, and also to give those locations an incentive to kind of improve what they were doing, or, you know, maybe make some changes if their scores weren't that high. So I think that was something that was useful. We learn a lot about that in our classes here, that, you know, you might have an idea, but a really important thing of implementing that idea is making sure it works and measuring it and, you know, looking at that data. So this is leading on, so I've talked a little bit about the green initiatives that TTSL is engaged in. And so when I came there, as I said, I didn't have that much experience in green infrastructure, et cetera. So they have another big concentration through their big picture. Like Marie was saying, they have all these values of corporate sustainability. And under this big picture, there's environment and education. So these initiatives fell under the education part. And this was more of going out into the communities and providing internet connectivity to help different NGOs, or providing technology to sort of help other communities succeed. And a big emphasis is on economic sustainability. And this is another thing we talk about in a lot of our classes, is this big debate about aid, you know, just giving money to people, does it work? And I found that TTSL's way of doing it, which was more providing, they don't really have money to give away, so they provide services. I found this to be a very successful way of helping out communities and reaching out. So some of the various programs they have, they partner with local NGOs in each location. This is AMBA CIC. It's the AMBA Center for the Economic Empowerment of the Intellectually Challenged. This was in Bangalore, and this is myself and my project leader, Sangeeta Robinson. We're there visiting the center. And this was probably my favorite thing that I witnessed when I was in India. It was really a really neat program. So what they do is these kids here, they're intellectually challenged, so most of them have a very low IQ. And what they do is they teach them the special way of entering data, which is looking at a key and then pressing it, and like looking at a number and pressing it in. So they're able to do very accurate and very efficient data work. So what TTSL does is provides them internet connections to do this training and also work. So they give them their data to enter into the system. And it was just great to go there and see all these kids. They were so proud of what they were doing, and it was just, they could see that they were doing some really great work, and they were actually more efficient than other workers who, are doing the same job. So that's it for my presentation, and I really enjoyed my time there, and it really showed me what corporate sustainability looks like in a corporation when it's taken seriously, and that was something very interesting, and I learned a lot from it. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Ryan Ballard, and he spent the summer in Jamshedpur, which we just learned is where Mr. Jagannathan spent 25 years. So it should be interesting to compare and contrast their perspectives. So I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Alexis. My summer was pretty much very similar to Marie's and Kate's. I was a brand new person being sent to a foreign country that I had been to once before, but not in a similar sense. And I was supposed to work on a project with very little experience, and also with a very different perspective coming from Berkeley and coming from the United States. So I worked at Tata Steel, the CSS division, which is the Corporate Sustainability Services, in Jamshedpur, India. Jamshedpur is a really interesting place. It's in the state of Jharkhand, and Jharkhand is it's a newer state compared to most of the other states in India. It's about 10 years old, I believe. Jamshedpur is kind of like a little diamond inside of a big vat of coals, I guess you can say. Jamshedpur hosts some of the highest rates in education and quality of life, higher than the national rates in India. It also boasts some of the nicest amenities and social services available to its people. Tata Steel and Tata Motors are both located in Jamshedpur, and they also offer a lot of great benefits for their employees. They really take care of their employees pretty well. And then you have the rest of the state of Jharkhand. Just on the border of Jamshedpur lies extreme poverty. You have some of the highest rates of maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates, higher than the national levels. And then you also have some of the lowest quality of life in all of India, next to Uttar Pradesh. So it's kind of a place to really observe major extremes in India. You can see beautiful parks and very nicely designed cities and nice marketplaces in Jamshedpur. And you can go just to the border. You can drink water inside of Jamshedpur too from the tap. And then you just go to the border of the city and you can't drink the water anymore. There's limited water accessibility. It's a place where a lot of people are kind of dealing with a lot of different health issues, and you see extreme poverty kind of located all over the city. So it's a very, it was one of the most interesting places I've ever been to in the world to really see all this. So I was in Jamshedpur for 8 weeks, and my job was to work on a project with the Tata Steel Family Health and Initiatives, department of the CSS department of Tata Steel. CSS is Corporate Sustainability Services. And I was supposed to create some sort of assessment, a framework for assessing the reach of health services and health competencies to the communities that they served. I'm an anthropology major. This was very interesting for me. I have a really invested interest in public health and health as sort of a rights idea for people. And it was interesting for me to go to a place where people kind of expected me to do statistical work and do all this work around numbers and try to just assess how their services are reaching the people as a social science major. So I was kind of stuck between this realm of how do I apply my knowledge so it's useful to them and explain it to them, and how do I approach understanding this whole corporate sustainability, corporate citizenship idea, and corporate numbers, really, just a lot of numbers that I don't really work well within normally. So instead I decided to kind of reapproach the project with an anthropological view. So I created a qualitative assessment, a qualitative framework to kind of overlook the different services that were available. And I just went and talked to the people and tried to understand how the programs and services work on a day-to-day basis for the people, and how the people themselves benefited and how they lived and what their circumstances was, and trying to decipher if the needs were being met and if the services were appropriate for the people that were being served. So my presentation is a little bit different. It's going to have just basically 3 main ideas that were kind of persistent throughout my time there. So there was this first one, and it looks like you can't see my titles, unfortunately. No, it's okay. Luckily, I wrote them down. I'm never prepared, but today I am. So the first one was health is an essential priority. So within development, there's a lot of different development initiatives. You've seen 2 very different ones that Marie and Kate worked on in terms of helping people out with employability, trying to give people finances. But oftentimes, one of the main themes that really persisted throughout my time in India and within my project was the notion that health is really essential for almost everything. Health is really essential for almost any development project to have any success. It's a basic idea of you can't do anything with people who are sick, right? So you can't give them a job, you can't give them money, you can't support them, or you can't even promote some sort of self-reliability if the people themselves aren't necessarily taking care of their health, or they can't take care of their health. So there's this idea of healthcare as a basic need. So with basic needs, you might think of things like water and food and other things. And there was kind of this argument that in Jamshedpur that they kind of follow at Tata Steel, where they believe that everyone should have health care. So they were giving health services to all the population. So they would set up free clinics. I attended these free clinics and would observe people and observe the doctors and kind of shadow them and try to understand what the people were going through, how they understood the services, and how they didn't understand the services oftentimes, and what they really needed. So this is one particular case. There was just a woman at a clinic in Kazirnagar, which is a Muslim community in Jamshedpur, right outside of Jamshedpur. Perhaps you know the name. So yeah, it was a really interesting moment. I was interviewing her. She had both of her knees had major issues. She had early arthritis all over her knees. It's a long time ago, and now she was only in her like 50s or 60s, and she had experienced tremendous pain. She had broken her leg like a couple years before, but she never did anything about it because she couldn't. So she's been living on a broken leg, and she has to walk like 45 minutes to the clinic in blistering heat every day to get there. But the clinic is only offered about once a week, so she doesn't really have all the amenities being met. But this is the best that Tata Steel could do for her, is bringing this free clinic and just giving her basic treatment. There was also the other idea of macroparasites versus microparasites. So this is a topic that we've talked about in Anani Roy's global poverty class. The idea that sickness goes beyond the individual. Every day we encounter bacteria and different things, parasites and other sorts of illnesses that may afflict us and may not afflict us. And we have this idea that maybe our health is taking care of ourselves and how to keep ourselves healthy. But what I really observed this summer was that health is not always about taking care of yourself, but it's also about how society takes care of you, or how structures of a society or a social system can persist certain illnesses. So why does a certain person have the same encounter with certain bacteria and walk away with it fine, and another person gets deathly ill from it? Or why does a person get sick and they can get it treated with no problem and go on with their life? And why does a person die from it? So it's a whole Paul Farmer kind of ideology of people having rights to basic health care and these structural, bigger societal things that kind of affect people outside of their individual selves. And I really observed that a lot in India this summer. People that were not only sick because they were just sick, but also because they were structurally kind of marginalized and sick, right? So it was kind of the system crushing them, and it was kind of painful to watch sometimes. And then the last point that I had says the feminization of poverty. So this is another topic that we've talked a lot about within anthropology and also within Anani Roy's global poverty course. So this is the idea that there's sort of this feminizing process going on of the discourse around poverty and poverty alleviation right now. I've really observed this really strongly in Jamshedpur with Tata Steel. All of their services really focus on women as these key agents to make changes. So there's a lot of gender equality and gender promotion programs. And I was always observing this kind of rhetoric around promoting women and going into communities and helping women and kind of bridging the gap between men and women equality in terms of the usual male superiority that exists in India in a very patriarchal society that we also see in the United States, but you can see a little more extreme sometimes in India. So oftentimes women were these kind of key agents to make the changes. And I saw this in their rhetoric and in their journals and in their reports, but then I also saw it at the clinics, for example. When we would have these free clinics, the only people that would come are women with their children because men are usually working or men don't have responsibility over the household like the women do, or just men wouldn't come. There's a variety of reasons. So women would always come, and women had some of the most, extreme health issues, and their children also had a lot of extreme health issues. So I kind of saw firsthand like this sort of feminizing process of poverty and how the women were not only the key agents, but also some of the most affected people in this. And we see a lot of campaigns around this, so it's kind of a theme that is not new. The next one, my presentation was so nice before, by the way. It's okay. Now it just looks like I did nothing. So, yeah, luckily I did write this one down too. So this was kind of the idea of the privatization of everything, which is another kind of thing that we've talked about a lot at Berkeley. It was interesting going from Berkeley, seeing all these protests all the time on, the neoliberal university and the university privatizing itself and, the public kind of withdrawing their services from people and students here suffering. And you kind of have that idea that is there persisting, that everything is kind of becoming more privatized as the public sector is kind of withdrawing itself. So what this sentence said was, examples of neoliberal ideology proliferate on a day-to-day basis through the realm of healthcare in Jharkhand. So that first idea is, 1 minute left. That first idea is basically just more private enterprises and more private services being offered to stand in place of the public services that were being taken away. And the public, you can see firsthand the public kind of service sector withdrawing itself, and Tata Steel having to come in and put more services out there. So it's kind of like duality going on where Tata Steel was giving more services, so the private services were kind of competing and actually providing better services than the public services. I'm going to go on to the next one. And then this other idea was just the idea of water. So with all the social services that were being offered and women empowerment and women equality groups and kind of promoting this idea of like social equality, sometimes in some of the communities I was in, it seemed almost unnecessary because people, what they were really missing was basic services. So every community that I was in, they were missing water, access to water or water and sanitation, whether it was in urban slums or the rural places that I worked in India, in Jharkhand, most of the villages, they were all missing that like key agent of water. So without water, a lot of people were coming into the clinics with preventable health issues that were due to their limited access to water. And then also they were becoming more sick because they didn't have access to water. So a lot of times what the women would tell me is we're really grateful that they're coming in and teaching us about empowerment, but what we need most is water, and we don't have it. So that was another theme that really kind of took in place. So the last thing, there was just a question of how do you get to Hoodoo? And Hoodoo was one of the districts that I worked within. And a big theme that I learned throughout my time with Tata Steel was how complex it really is to work in the realm of development. You have this idea that there's this poor woman in the village, in one of my projects specifically, which was Mansi, which is the maternal and child health or child survival initiative. So there's this idea of women and children needing help in this village, so how do you get to them? And Mansi's chain to get to them was very complicated. You have this, you start as an idea, and then it goes to the funders, and then you have to pick a project coordinator, and then you have to pick a field coordinator, and then you have to pick a zonal coordinator where you separate different groups of villages into different zones. And then you have these motivators who train these animators who finally go and to the villages, and actually from the villages themselves. And that's where you actually meet the mother and child. So how effective is that, and how does it work? So it was a very complex process to really understand how development worked. And the last slide was just a thank you to the Tysees internship and to this experience. It was a really amazing experience, and not only did I have great encounters with great ideas of what I've learned at Berkeley, but also I got to do very fun things like play soccer for my first time with a whole village. I thought I was just going to be taught soccer one day, and I showed up and an entire village was like ready to play for me and gave me a jersey, and it was a real game, which was really intimidating. And we won, which was great. So yeah, so thank you very much to everybody who's been involved with this.
So we have our final Tata ISIS fellow presenting, Neda Sagafi, and she was in Mitapur with Marie, which incidentally is, we've worked with Tata Chemicals in Mitapur all 3 years. So it's the only site where we've had consistent student placements, and we've been very impressed with the support that we've received from the Tata Chemicals Society for Rural Development. Sorry, there's so many acronyms. It's hard to keep track. So I'll turn it over to Neda to tell you about her experience with TCSRD.
All right. Well, thank you, Alexis. I'm going to start off my presentation a little bit differently, and I'm going to kind of look at the macro level of things. And I sort of want to start with this idea known as culture shock, and though certainly not necessarily unique to the Tata ICES program, I do think it's critical and crucial in understanding the way we shape our experiences. So what is culture shock? And the way I kind of look at culture shock is the difficulty that arises in approaching a new culture. And how do we renegotiate that space? And is it even possible to experience multiple levels of culture shock in a short duration of 2 months? So I'm going to start off at the very beginning and landing in Mumbai and kind of realizing my role as a tourist, because that was what I was on day one. I was a tourist. And so kind of the first phase of culture shock is known as this honeymoon phase, where everything is better, the sights, the sounds, the people. And that was the way I was viewing my experience, through the role and the frame and the lens of a tourist. And that quickly changed on the second day when my internship actually started. So now I was placed in the framework and the lens and the perspective of an intern who was reminded that I was here to do quote-unquote development work and to act as an agent of change. So I was seeing the inequalities, I was seeing that blatantly, and I was seeing the children who were begging and hustling on the street for food. And it wasn't hard to see. It was something that was very present. And the contrast that Marie spoke of was very evident to me. And so as I went to my site in Mitapur in Gujarat, there was an added layer of complexity to that culture shock. So renegotiating that space once more. So just to give you a background, Mitapur can definitely be contrasted with Mumbai. It's about 2.5 square kilometers. It's not very largely inhabited or densely inhabited. It is situated in what's known as the Okamandal Taluka, so about 44 villages and a total of 5 census towns. And so here again, I was looking to kind of a new environment and a new space. And unlike Mumbai, I was initially, me and Marie actually were the only foreigners initially. So not only was there an internal feeling of being different, but there was a physical and tangible difference that was present that I was constantly reminded of in this small area and this small township. So my first week was actually consisted of an orientation and kind of the work that TCSRD as a nonprofit does. So TCSRD being Tata Chemical Society for Rural Development. And so I was realizing that kind of TCSRD has really long been established. They started in 1980 with agriculture as their focus. Which makes sense since 65% of the Okamandal Taluka depends on agriculture for their livelihood development. So what TCSRD began doing in this drought-prone region was looking for ways to harvest water. And this kind of goes into my project. And they've increasingly moved towards this three-pronged approach towards agriculture, which is watershed development or water harvesting, water management and distribution, and also agricultural interventions. And my project focused on the latter two portions of natural resource management in combination with market linkages in this isolated area. So how do we take farmers in this isolated region and connect them to the larger market so they're making the profit that they deserve to be making? So I kind of began my project by taking a sample size of 4 villages with 4 farmers per village. And the way I approached this was by asking interview questions and largely centered around input cost versus output revenue. So I could get an idea of kind of the profit that farmers were making and an understanding of maybe where costs could be cut if they weren't crucial. And I grew increasingly frustrated because I was learning that there was no sense of financial literacy, which poses a problem. Farmers didn't know what their input costs were. And according to a lot of them, and according to my translator, they were actually making negative profit. They were operating in the red. And this proved really problematic. But as I began working more and more with TCSRD, I also noticed a huge engagement with the community. So let's layer culture shock some more. So let's think about how these difficulties that are arising in my head are being manifested. And I think just the way that TCSRD engages with the community is amazing, and it's pretty spectacular because it's this notion of participatory rural appraisal that we always speak of coming to action and coming to light. So what I was seeing was TCSRD staff members directly speaking to communities, asking them what they needed, seeing what problems arose, creating relationships with village leaders, and then having and giving them the power to work on particular projects themselves. So giving them the training and then having them implement it and also fund part of these projects. And what was even greater, and I think Kate touched upon this, was a process of evaluation. So they were instating these projects and then they were going back and they were evaluating how useful they were. How useful was the drip irrigation, the sprinkler irrigation, the roof rainwater harvesting structures. And I was really lucky to be part of that because as I interviewed farmers, I would ask them, how has this increased your yield? Have you seen a benefit to kind of the sprinkler, the drip, et cetera? And it was evident and there were tangible results and people were really appreciative of that. These were some of the suggestions that I made. I won't go through them in depth, but you can certainly ask me about them a little later on. And then suggested market linkages that TCSRD had been thinking about and which I kind of expanded upon. And I think I took a lot away from this experience, but these were sort of my key takeaways. And I think I'll start off at the bottom in that there is immense importance in fostering relationships with people. You can be a legitimate authority and still not be taken legitimately. And I think that's what TCSRD showed me. And then solutions have to be catered to the locale. We learned that so many times. And yet when I was doing research or I was thinking about other drought-prone regions, I was realizing that these aren't necessarily feasible for this area. So I think that's a really important key takeaway. And when I spoke to villagers, I was always really impressed because it was this idea that you don't have to have many material things to be happy, and happiness is just based upon perception. And this is something that my project guide taught me and helped me foster, is that the small details are important in framing the larger picture. They are important, but you need to understand the larger contextual issues that are in place before you can even begin to utilize those small details. So yeah, I'm really grateful for the experience, and I certainly learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Netta. Before we launch into the presentations by our 2 Tata Travel Research Fellows, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that we do have another alum of the Tata ISIS program, Pedro Rosado, who was in our first year of the program and based in Barbralas. So it's really great to have 3 generations of Tata ISIS Fellows here in the room. I'm going to turn the time over now to Neha Kumar, who did a project related to new media with the funds that she received for her Tata Travel Research Fellowship.
Hi everyone, so I'm Neha Kumar and I'm a third-year PhD student at the School of Information, and my advisor is Tapan Parekh. So this is actually part of my dissertation research, which actually began at the Center of South Asia Studies with the Kabir project, and I'll introduce you to that briefly. So Shabnam Virmani is a social activist, documentary filmmaker, and she has worked extensively with folk music communities across India, also Pakistan. And she made these 4 films that were focused on Kabir, who was a poet who lived in the 14th, 15th century, and how the poetry of Kabir has sort of played its way into different issues, different socio-cultural issues like communal harmony, like just regional politics, and folk versus classical music debates. So I ended up working with her after I met her, actually, when she came here for the screenings and for the concert through the Center for South Asia Studies, and then pretty much followed her around for the summer of 2009, where I was visiting different communities in Rajasthan, in Madhya Pradesh with her. And we visited several of the artists that she had worked with, and also and stayed with them, spent some time in their communities. So with that context, moving on. So in this time that we spent with these communities in Jaisalmer, Bikaner, in Malwa, in Madhya Pradesh, I spent some time just trying to see what are the different ways in which this music at the grassroots level has an impact on the community. So the first realization I had was that this isn't just for entertainment. In a lot of ways, it is their only source of education, because a lot of these communities are mostly illiterate or semi-literate. And so for education, not just classroom education, but also spiritual education, it kind of teaches them values and this sort of code of ethics to follow. In different ways, this is their medium for conveying messages of, healthcare awareness, and different things that I have since read a lot about, different campaigns going on in India and Africa on this issue. But that was my introduction. And one of the stories that I came across that really moved me was about this artist, Mukhtiar Ali, who Shabnam had worked with. And before she met him, he was really not known at all outside of his village, which is in Pugal, near the border of Pakistan. And he is a really talented musician. So after she met him, after she worked with him, and actually filmed him for one of her 4 films, he is now much more well-known across India. He's been performing. At that point, he had this mud house that he lived in with his family. His kids didn't go to school at that point. 3 years down the line, his kids are going to school, and he's able to afford a house, a permanent house. And so this was just a really moving story to me, that these artists, a lot of them don't really have the means to sort of get their music out. And they do perform also in cities, but talking to people at the government level also, I found that they don't really make very much from their music practice. So they're basically farmers or teachers, but they have other professions. They're not really making anything out of their music practice. So that was my introduction to the field of grassroots music in rural India. And the thing that I found really stunning was just the penetration of new media technologies in this space, and how in concerts and even in smaller settings, new media devices like CDs, DVDs, cell phones are being used at a really stunning rate for the distribution of this music, for listening to this music, sharing this music. And this has happened a lot more over the last 3 to 5 years with the cell phone that is now really a household tool. So pretty much, this is from interviews that I had with people in the villages in Malwa and Bikaner, and I found that every household either has a cell phone or has access to a cell phone. And they use it not just for making calls, but they use it for many other purposes, one of them being listening to music and sharing music with other people. And one of the concerts that I attended basically had, people holding up their phones, and there were like maybe 2,000 people in the audience. And there were about 100 people holding up their phones to make recordings of the concert, and actually then sharing those recordings with their friends and family. And then there are businesses that have evolved that are catering to this need in the community. So there are people who go out and make these recordings of these concerts and distribute them for a profit. And of course, there's no question of distribution rights whatsoever. I mean, they simply make these recordings, they distribute them. The artists know that this is happening, but they don't really have a way of controlling that. It's too expensive to get copyright protection for their music. And so there are a lot of issues in that space of just new media being used for the dissemination of this music. And so some of the research questions, well, the main research questions that I ended up with as a result of the time that I've spent in these communities in summer 2009 and then thanks to Tata in summer 2010, were basically, how is this music having an impact within these communities? And how is new media in particular facilitating that impact? And finally, how do people, so the three main role players in this situation are basically the artists, so the creators of this music, the distributors, so the businesses who are actually recording this music and sharing this with people for profit, and then the end user, the members of the community who want this music, who are willing to pay for this music, for the service. And I was interested in seeing how are they responding to piracy, because I went in thinking that piracy is a bad thing. It's not giving the artists, money for their art, and it's also leading to the end user being overcharged for the service. But I found that within the community, actually, people seem to be really at ease with the fact that there's this widespread pirated, distribution, and that was one of the things that I was interested in exploring. Also, how has this attitude come about, and are there ways of exploring whether this distribution can happen without there being widespread piracy, but also at the same time not alienating these businesses? So those are the questions that I'm going to be exploring for the rest of my dissertation research. So very briefly, basically next year in summer and fall, I'm going to be doing the rest of my dissertation research and then writing up in the summer. So thank you, Tata, for helping me along with my dissertation research.
So our final presenter is unfortunately not in your program, but we're delighted that she was able to make it today. Her name is Malia Hunt, and she was also a Tata Travel Research Grant recipient and fellow, and is also a Gender and Women's Studies major and Global Poverty minor. So we're delighted she's going to be sharing with us today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Malia. Thank you for the introduction. And so I'm a Gender and Women's Studies major, and I'm minoring in Global Poverty and Practice, which is what inspired me to work with the NGO that I chose to work with, which is a women's empowerment NGO located in Jodhpur in Rajasthan. And it primarily works with low-caste Indian women to empower them through teaching them English and Hindi, and also to teach them various sewing skills to eventually generate an income for them. However, when students graduate, they call them students. The NGO refers to them as students. When they graduate from the NGO, they try and place them within a sewing school where they could actually start, or where they can start generating an income and selling their stuff. Although it's only about 13 women has actually made it to that point so far. So the NGO actually has various programs where one's located in a rural village. It's called Satrawa Village. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but and then there's two in Jodhpur. And I worked with the ones in Jodhpur, which is a pretty big city. It's the second largest city in Rajasthan, actually. So I have close contact with the girls and women of the NGO every day. The NGO is based out of a guest house that is owned by a family, and I had the opportunity to stay at the guest house, so I became very close to the family and had a chance to help cook dinner sometimes and everything. So it was very nice. My experience there wasn't just doing research and volunteering, but I also felt like I was able to become part of a family and really just cherish my experience there. It was very nice. So. Oh, how do I go back? Yeah, okay, cool. So, my volunteer work was, I helped teach English to the students, but it was very difficult because the majority of them spoke Hindi and some spoke Marwari, which is what a lot of people speak in Rajasthan. So trying to teach English and having very, very, very little Hindi speaking skills was very difficult, and I wish I could have had more time to study Hindi prior to going. So, but what I found was that all of the girls and women were very passionate about learning. They were just very interested because they didn't have the opportunity to get school from another source. This was their school, which was very interesting because I'm coming in and not trained to teach, especially not to trained to teach people who don't speak English primarily. And I was just trying my hardest to actually make some kind of effect happen for them and something that they could sustain, I also taught workshops and designed workshops, but my time was short. I was there for 2 months, so I didn't really feel like I had enough time to construct really strong workshops. So I did things like I taught art, or try as good as I can. I'm not an excellent artist, but I got a bunch of painting supplies, and we all painted together. It was very nice. And I also wrote 5 grant proposals, which is what took the majority of my time, and it was really a long process, and I really cherished the NGO, and so I tried to work as hard as I can on these. I felt like almost at times where I was working harder than I would have during finals at Berkeley, because not only was I wasn't just trying to make something beneficial for myself, but I'm thinking about all these girls and women that I'm becoming close to. And so there were nights where I was sleeping 2 hours. And so that was something actually that was a big deal, because in India and here, but I would say very much in India, social interaction and social relationships are very important. And so for the first month, I had became very close to people, but the second month I was working on all these grant proposals and trying to finish them before I was coming back, but I had so much work to do, and I really wanted them to be perfect so the NGO could get funding. So instead of sitting down and having conversations when I would normally, I was working on these grant proposals. So I felt kind of isolated in a way from the family and the girls and women of the NGO, and it was very unfortunate. And it's still I'm still left with the question: did I do the right thing? Should I have not put as much effort into the grant proposals and spent more time trying to nurture my social relationships with them? So I don't know if there's really an answer to that question, but I still think about it constantly. Some other experiences I had, which were really cool when I was with the NGO, I was able to go to the rural village and witness a medical workshop that was given. But it was primarily done in Hindi, or like 99% in Hindi. So I just tried to pick up on like pictures that were shown and like different things were like held up. So that was interesting. And I also got to go to government, all these different government self-help groups that the organization managed. There were like a huge amount of government self-help groups, and the Symboli Trust was the only NGO who actually had the opportunity to manage some of them, which was cool. So my research while I was in India, I wasn't just volunteering, I was trying to do research to take away with me as well. So I conducted about 24 interviews with the help of 3 translators, and I did 49 surveys, and I also took daily field notes and work log of like all the work that I was doing, so I could like watch my progress along the way. And then I wanted all this information to not just be for me and like I'm spending my time to take away my research with. I wanted to make a database for the NGO, so I put all of this information into a database so that future volunteers could see trends within the girls and women of the NGO. And basically what I was looking at for the interviews and surveys, what I was hoping to pull out was not just demographics, but what they want from empowerment, what their perceptions are of empowerment, what difficulties they have in their life. Like, you know, a lot of them felt like they spend too much time doing housework, they don't have enough time, and when they come to the NGO, it's the only time they really have to break away from like catering to other people within their family. And also I found that there was few women, because the surveys were anonymous, but a few women either were experiencing domestic violence or knew somebody who was experiencing it. And then I also found that a lot of the women said that if there is domestic violence happening to anyone, that all the women should band together and stop it. So I really wanted to implement a workshop about domestic violence prior to leaving, and I did a lot of research and like gathered Indian laws and everything. Am I doing okay on time? Okay. And gathered Indian laws and started constructing it, but because I was working on the grant proposals, I wasn't able to actually do it before I left, and so that was a very unfortunate thing for me. It was really difficult to leave that, and I keep like writing volunteers saying, please do this. Okay, cool. So yeah. So my research right now, I am actually writing my thesis on my experience so that I can, so I'm in my senior year. I'm just trying to really digest my experience, and I still have so many questions and so many things where I'm just like, oh, I need to figure this out. So basically my main research question is, what is empowerment? Who designs empowerment? Is this empowerment designed by the women and girls of the NGO? Also, is empowerment the same as gaining power? Because usually, to me, through my research, I've discovered that empowerment seems to be like somebody granting something to like someone from a higher status or whatever, granting power to someone of a lower status, like giving empowerment as opposed to like having power and taking power and whatever. So I'm just trying to really question like who has agency within empowerment, who creates empowerment, and who is actually empowered by this empowerment. Like, and what I'm kind of finding is that empowerment is primarily designed by donors because they're the ones who keep the NGO going, and projects will not continue to go unless the donors are giving money for it. So the NGO really has to design its projects in order to be appealing to donors. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I was going to ask if anyone has any questions. I don't know if we should wait a minute because...
Yeah, why don't we have all of the folks who presented just kind of come stand along the front, and then if you have questions for your peers, you're welcome to ask those as well. I have a... So if you want to ask the question and we can capture it on the video, that would be great. So if the fellows could join Malia up front, that would be great. We have a few minutes for questions. So I'll be Oprah Winfrey over here. In the old days. So does anyone have a question they want to ask one of the fellows? And again, you're welcome to ask each other as well. Oh. Can you say it?
I'm a Tata ISIS fellow from 2009, Elizabeth Schneider. My question actually was for Kate. So I was wondering, are there any like rural development initiatives in Tata Teleservices Limited? And in that context, a lot of the technology that they're developing, like for biomass, using biomass for fuel and electricity, a lot of that is like directly applicable to rural development. So are they trying to translate that from, you know, improving the business side of things to improving the rural development in terms of more greener fuel development?
So the answer is yes, definitely they're starting to do more rural development. I mean, with the internet connectivity and providing those connections to more rural communities, and also with the biofuel. So I can think right now they're just more concentrating on getting the towers green, but I think they have plans in the future to kind of expand that green energy thinking to try to help the communities out that surround them. But right now also one of the more rural outreach things that they're doing is the internet connectivity thing, just giving more rural communities that.
Pedro Rosado with the first Tata fellows. So had a wonderful time. I was in Uttar Pradesh. Before we went, we did a little bit of research on Tata and found out that they were doing something that was amazing, obviously. So we had some preconceptions, and then when we left, our preconceptions were completely changed. So do you have any of those experiences that India is actually a very magical place as well. So coupled with that and coupled with a corporation that's actually doing community development and all that, do you have a different perception of Tata, and is that going to help you in your future?
Okay, well, I can start off. And I think I went into it having, yes, preconceived notions. I'd heard of different things. I'd heard about Tata being a huge multinational. I had heard about CSR initiatives, but I didn't know exactly what they were doing. And so I tried to go into the situation as open-minded as possible. And so when I actually got to my site, I was really amazed at the work that the nonprofit was doing, and I elaborated upon this in my presentation, my little spiel, which was that there were really close connections that were forged between the community and the nonprofit, but it was also really amazing in that the nonprofit, I think, recognized the limitations of forging those connections, because sometimes things at the corporate level are not necessarily in line with things at the level that the nonprofit is doing work at. For instance, maybe water resources being taken away by corporate interests due to necessity to develop salt pans. So these were things that they recognized as restrictions, but the work that they did was really great. And so I was really impressed to see that people were really dedicated to the work that they were doing and in forging relationships with community members.
Yeah. Sure. I think, again, as an anthropology major, and perhaps also as a Berkeley student, you have very specific ideas of the corporation and the role of the corporation in society, and also some of the ramifications that have kind of happened and surfaced from corporate actions in certain corporate operations. So for me, going into it, I had this very, very big sense of skepticism and doubt over what Tata Steel was actually doing. I had done a lot of research on different CSR I guess, programs and different interventions that had totally failed and blown up in people's faces. And they're mostly American corporations, so I guess that was the trend. So I was kind of skeptical when I went. And the other thing was that I was kind of curious to know how they were meeting public services that were present and how they were kind of networking with public services. So when I got there, first of all, I mean, Tata still is full of amazing people, and they're very nice and they're very well-intentioned, and they're also very organized with what they do in the social realm. So it was pretty, I guess, shocking, and I think we all agreed to see the extent of which how they actually operated in the communities and how much they actually helped the communities with social services. And then the other thing was that how much, in a place like Jamshedpur, the whole infrastructure of the city is really based upon the corporation, and it really leans on Tata Steel. So to me, that was really fascinating. It made me a little skeptical and worrisome over how the dependence on a corporation could play out. But at the same time, I know that Tata Steel has really developed and built itself a really strong reputation in the world. So I don't foresee them collapsing anytime soon and just letting all these people fend for themselves. So it was a lot of interesting contradictions and also a lot of interesting revelations for myself over the summer. Anybody else?
I'm Claire Talwalkar, Vice Chair of the Minor and a lecturer at IIS. And my question turns the attention a little bit to the actual experience of the fellowship. For you as students, it doesn't really so much apply to the travel grant recipients. But I'm curious because it seemed to me, so two of you were together, but then two of you were on your own. And I wondered if in terms of feedback for TISIS, would you have any kind of suggestion for whether you would think there'd be benefits to being placed in pairs, as I know two of you were, or whether it worked out to be all alone in a place you'd never visited before. So that was the one part of my question. Is there some benefit to a kind of mini Cal camaraderie, student US camaraderie that will allow you to be maybe more effective, given that culture shock piece that Neda, you were talking about? The other piece had to do with language, and it came up in almost all your presentations, barring Neha's, which was that you spoke of talking to people and then of having interview translators to help you, interpreters to help you. And I wondered if you had any feedback for Tata on that issue. Like, would it be good for future TISIS fellows to have more language training? But then in which language? Hindi, Gujarati, etc. What about interpreters? Anything specific you could offer to Tata for what kind of interpretation experiences or relationships we talked about interpretation, for example, in our class. So those are the questions.
Marie, you haven't spoken yet.
Hi. I guess the first question would be whether it's better to be paired up or alone. I think that would depend a lot on the personality of the people traveling. There's definitely there's a sense of relief sometimes when you come back after a really difficult day of communicating to have somebody who understands your stupid jokes and kind of, it's just it's easy to communicate, and that can be definitely a relief. On the other hand, it does prevent you from interacting, I think, with other people as much as you would. I didn't make a lot of close friends in Michapur. It was partly the community was mostly married couples with children, so there was probably other differences between us. But probably if I was alone, I would have had more interaction. And then your second question, you're saying about translation in general. I didn't get a translator for the first month, so that was a little difficult because the people in my department specifically didn't really speak English. Even the director of the department often had trouble expressing what she wanted from me. And so definitely just having somebody there would be a good start, I think. But once I did have a translator, that helped a lot. It made a big difference. She actually had no experience working with the organization, which at first I felt was a disadvantage because she didn't know what was going on at all. She was just as out of the loop as I was in some cases. But I did realize there was some advantage to that as well, that when we were speaking to the villagers, she didn't have the preconceptions that other people who'd done it for 20 years would have. And so I think she was able to remove some of the judgment and just kind of tell me what they were actually saying, which was refreshing, because I've heard horror stories about people always, the translators just saying what they already believe instead of what the person's actually telling you. So.
So I kind of have a different perspective because I was all by myself in Delhi, and I personally thought it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed being on my own. I feel like I was not really forced, but it was fun to kind of venture out, and you didn't have to worry about, another person that might be left out, etc. So I really enjoyed being on my own. One thing that I would suggest to Tata in the future would be considering a homestay. I feel that living in a guest house was it was interesting and it was nice, but at the same time, it would have been nice to have a similar experience that you had, like living with a family and getting to know people, or maybe moving around a bit. And as far as the language goes, I feel I didn't really talk to that many people on the ground, but I had had a year and a half of Hindi training before I went, and this definitely helped just from an office perspective and in the company, just sort of talking to people and making friends, and it also made the entire experience a little more fun, because you can kind of know what's going on and it's a little more interesting. But then again, I guess you got to learn some new things too, so either way.
Do you want us to elaborate more?
I always have something to say. So, yeah, for myself, I think that I really enjoyed being dropped off in the middle of nowhere and not knowing anything, not knowing what to do, and not knowing anybody. But I know that for some people that would be really, really uncomfortable. Jamshedpur was like a very different place than I thought I was going to. I kind of thought I was going to like a really rural area. And for a second, I thought I was in a really small city. And so I talked to Maria on the phone and found out that she was in a really, really, really small city. So I felt a little better, yeah. But I think that it was really beneficial to, like I said, be in that type of environment where I was sort of, I was put into a situation where I had to figure things out on my own and kind of had to question things. So that was what I got out of the internship. But maybe in terms of the work that I produced, it would have been maybe more effective if I had other brains to kind of brainstorm with, We're kind of in that cow culture sometimes where we have these like certain ideas that are all very common here and everybody understands them. And then you try to bring them to a different place and people don't know what you're talking about when you start talking about the feminization of poverty or something. People are like, what does that mean? So I can only refer them to readings or something. But and then the other thing was the language. And the language for me, I always enjoy going to places and like really immersing myself. So I picked up like very, very little Hindi, and that was exciting to even learn a sentence or two. But in 2 months, I couldn't even like have a deep conversation with my driver, let alone somebody, in a village. So I think Kate's suggestion with the homestay is a really nice idea. And I think that if we had a little more intense Hindi training before we left, even a semester, I think I would have been fine with that foundation for sure. So. And Elizabeth did an awesome job at supplying us with some Hindi before we left. Your notes stuck with me the whole time. And I was always referring to them. Anybody else?
I think this question's interesting because I really think it's dependent upon your personality. So Ryan just said that he loves being placed in unknown situations, et cetera, et cetera. I'm personally not like that. And so I was grateful to have a Cal camaraderie there with me, that Cal camaraderie there. But I think it's also dependent on the place you go to. So in Mitapur, I think I actually would have been fine had I been alone. In Delhi, probably not so much. Or if I had been placed in Mumbai, for instance, I probably would have wanted that companionship. And I have to agree completely with Marie in saying that, had we not had one another, we probably would have fostered deeper relationships. So I think that's true. I think that's a true component of it. In terms of translation and interpreters, I got a translator pretty early on. And also my translator was coming from outside of the corporation. So she was really great, but I thought that something was a little bit humorous in that things would be translated from Hindi to Gujarati to the dialectical form of whatever was spoken and then to English. And then I knew I was missing a lot. So that proved to be very problematic because I'm sure some of those cost numbers got screwed up somewhere in there. So I think that's kind of my take on that question.
I have a microphone. Yeah, I would have loved to have learned more Hindi prior to going. Even though like people in Dominant spoke Hindi there, there was a lot of Marwari too, but everybody pretty much understood Hindi to what I understood. But it would have been much more beneficial if I could have learned more Hindi. Even while I was there, I also had the printout that you made, and I was carrying it around with me. But then when I used it, people were correcting me, and everybody's telling me different things. So then I'm like keeping a book and trying to write all these things down, and finally I was just like, oh my God, this is not. But if I would have had more time and learned more Hindi, it would have been much more beneficial, especially because like my research question is what is empowerment, and I have very little ability to communicate with the girls and women who I'm writing this about, you know? So I highly recommend to anybody going to a foreign country where they are not going to speak the language that well to spend as much time studying it prior, for sure. And if you could make that available, I would have definitely loved that. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually, well, this is good feedback, and because
Yeah,
because of the Tata ISIS program, actually, a few years ago, we used to do sort of smaller trainings, a little bit of language, a little bit of cultural training. But because of the need, we really saw a need for establishing a class on spoken Hindi. And so it's going to be piloted next semester. And I know that doesn't help all of you, but it is really, because of these experiences that we are piloting this with. One of the really, eminent professors of Hindi, Usha Jain, has agreed to teach this course. So it's going to be a combination. It's not going to be written because it's not enough time in a semester, but it's just really spoken Hindi. And many of you mentioned, even the areas where you go, although Hindi is not spoken, it does help to have it in other interactions. But it's also going to have a cultural component to it, which I think is very important. And that's actually a question I wanted to ask for any of you. Is there something, other than the language issue, are there other things that you wish you had known before you went? And this is in relation to sort of preparation and something that the center can and would like to be involved in, in areas of, health, safety, other areas. Is there a particular thing that you wish you had known before you went that you didn't, or you had to learn on your own that you wish you had known?
Oh, right. You? No?
If you don't have any.
You had a little bit of...
Actually, I need a minute to think. Do you guys want? Go ahead.
Do you have something?
Yeah,
it's a really difficult question.
That's what I was going to get. It's a very difficult question. I mean, there's a million things I wish I would have learned, and I'm still wishing I learned by going. But I think that as global poverty minors, I think the majority of us are. I know you're not, but we had a lot of time to prepare for our experience, right? I mean, you're all minor, yeah. So. We had a lot of preparation time, but there's things that you just really can't prepare for. Like, knowing that I'm going to go and do all this work on grant proposals and how it might affect my social relationships, you can't really prepare for that. Like, even if I am given a class on, how important social interaction is and everything, like, you really, I don't know, it's a very difficult question to ask, I would say definitely the language is like that's cut and dry, but I don't know if there's really anything else that I could say that you kind of just have to experience and still have questions about, unless anybody else.
I don't know, I was going to say for the actual fellowship, maybe more details about the actual internship itself before we go. I feel we get kind of a broad overview, but the actual nitty-gritty specifics you don't get until you're there, and knowing some of that would have helped prepare me at least a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that I personally really enjoy going native when I go abroad and just kind of like figuring it out and trying to do everything you can just to fit in. So it was always exciting for me. I don't think it would probably be more abstract, I think, if I tried to learn like the culture before too much. And I think Netta and Marie probably can talk more about this because they didn't have any experience in India before the summer. And Kate and I kind of have a foundation, and perhaps, I think you did too, and maybe Malia. But yeah, and the other thing is that I just wish I knew more about my project itself before I got there, so I could have better prepared myself. So.
Yeah, I pretty much agree that there was nothing that stood out to me as like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd known that. More information about the project always would be nice. There seemed to be a little confusion when I got to my site about whether what I'd been told in advance was really what I was doing or not, and that was a little bit messy. But yeah, otherwise, I think that's part of the experience. You just learn from seeing how people do things.
I think a lot of what I would have to say would be just reiterated, but definitely knowing more about our project before we went, and we were told that wasn't necessarily possible because projects were ongoing, so it needed to be closer to the day of. But just to have that detail would have been really nice in preparation. And I agree with Malia on this one in that there are social interactions and there are things that may be considered taboo, but these are things that, yes, there's a cultural component that you can learn to some extent, but to another extent, it's experiential, right? So I think that's the biggest one.
Great, thank you all of you, and we'll just wrap up real quickly and then finish up. So if you want to take your seat.
Thank you.
I just want to say something. Sorry. The one thing that I didn't say at the end of my presentation, and I forgot because I was kind of rushing it, is I wanted to thank the two most important people, and this was for Alexis and Claire. They were directly the biggest help for us before we left. Alexis for sure, and Claire with prepping us for anything we needed to know about India. So thank you, both of you.
So just, yes, we'll have Mr. Jagannathan come up and say a few final words, and then we'll close out. So if you want to come up now, that would be great.
First of all, my heartiest congratulations to the presenters, Neha, Rayan, Murray, Neda, Malia, and Kate. You all really took me back to India, free of charge. And that was wonderful. I think your experiences have been very, very valuable to you and to me, sitting there and listening to all of you. There are quite a few lessons which probably we from Tata's can bring to the table. One of them, like you asked that question about language and getting familiar with the projects and familiar with the locales that you are going to be in India. We could probably bring that situation much better. For example, I would like to volunteer here that my home is in Fremont, and before you have the next batch going out to India, okay, I would like to host a dinner to those students who are going to India. Come over to my place, spend the whole day with my family, and get to know what it is to be in an Indian's home, okay? And also, we all speak English, but the Indian way of speaking English, spelled I-N-G-L-I-S-H, the Indian English is different from British English, different from the American English, and so on. So you get to know different languages within English. For example, Kate was in New Delhi. Delhi is a very cosmopolitan city. It's a capital of India, and language to her should not be a problem. And yet she felt that there could be someone with her, whereas Murray and Neda in Mithapur they felt that they could have managed on their own because of the location being what it is, and Ryan managed it very well. I remember in 1977 when I came first to US, I was sharing this with Shale this morning. I came to the US as a group study exchange program from the Rotary organization, Rotary International. And the whole idea behind that fellowship was international understanding and spreading goodwill. And one of the objectives of Tata ICS is also to have an international understanding and to really understand what is real India. Okay, so you will come to know that when you are on your own, not with as a pair. If you are together, then probably you will not learn as much as the objective is proposed here. So that is one thing. So as a solution, I'm offering my home, and people could come over and get entertained and entertain us also in return. I think Malia and Nida also mentioned this about the takeaways that socializing and building relationship with the families and other things is extremely important. When we take a project as a corporate social responsibility, CSR projects to villages, for example, even though we speak the same language, okay, whether it is a village in Maharashtra, I speak Marathi to them. If it is in Gujarat, then I speak Gujarati to them. If it is in Rajasthan, then in Jodhpur, for example, then you have to speak the local Jodhpuri Marwadi, and so on and so forth. But before we actually take the project, whether it is an adult literacy program or women's health initiative or whatever, we have to socialize that idea with the village sarpanch, who is the head of the village. And we have to have the buy-in of the villagers first, because if they turn anti to your ideas, then nothing can work in that village. So it is extremely important, as much important as in the metro cities like here in the Bay Area. If I have to sell an idea, I have to have the buy-in of all of you. Then only I can sell that idea. So also is there in the villages. So a CSR project or a sustainability project, if it has to be initiated and it has to be done with the language as a great barrier, then you have to have the support and you have to have the buy-in. And therefore, building relationships is extremely important. I think, like Malia was saying, that she had to overwork during her project stage and so on. Look at her commitment. That was really coming out so well. I like that idea. And during these 2 months of time, it's not just to do that CSR project, but it is to understand people, understand. And so spend the time in the evenings with the families. Maybe it's a good idea that probably Sajita and others can work with the Tata Group in saying that how can, instead of staying in the guest houses, can they stay with their families? Like when I came to the US, I was in the state of Texas and New Mexico. And half the time I didn't understand Texan drawls, but I was living with the families. I in 6 weeks' time I lived with 12 different families. So that was a great learning, and it was wonderful to be with the children, with the parents, with others, and so on. So it really removes a lot of perceptual barriers which one comes with, and then those are gone. So that could be one idea. And another point which Neha brought out was on the piracy aspects of music, and she is debating whether it is really bad or is it good to have piracy laws or so on. And going back to your own premise of talking about Kabir as the poet, and here is one thought which I would like to place before Berkeley, because this is the center of education and center of knowledge. And Kabir was a great poet who gave the idea of knowledge management way back 500 years back. And what did he talk about? He said, I can quote the actual verses, but the actual verse it means is that knowledge, if it is not shared, then it becomes halved. So don't keep knowledge as something within yourself. So I have a big mental debate going on all the time about the IP rights and IP issues and so on, intellectual property issues and so on. For sustainability, I think for the human sustainability, we need knowledge propagation, and we need knowledge to be shared freely with everyone, come what may. It should not become an intellectual property. So if somebody is copying knowledge and it is being shared, I think it is okay. And there should be nothing wrong. These are my personal views, not the views of the Tata Group as such. Okay. So I feel that So these were my thoughts on knowledge. And coming to Ryan, there is a famous quote in Jamshedpur that Tata Steel does everything. You have a football academy. He mentioned about soccer. What we call soccer here is football in India. So we have a football academy. We have an archery academy. We have so many academies and so many things happening that they say that we also make steel. So that's the way it is in Jamshedpur, and I'm very happy that I'm here with all of you today. I was supposed to be in Mexico City, but I'm very happy that got cancelled and I'm here. And I congratulate once again all the presenters and the Tata ISES program. I think all of you are doing a great job, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you again to Mr. Jagannathan to come up here from Tata Consulting Services, which some of our students, as he said, have worked with in the past in Maharashtra. And thank you again. I think you're really modeling what the students were talking about, the importance of building relationships by making that invitation. It's very generous. So with that, we'll close out the formal portion of the symposium, and I invite all of you to join us for lunch if you're available. Thank you.